Xbox just released a pretty interesting interview, specifically being from Major Nelson himself on his YouTube channel, between Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, Todd Howard, creative director at Bethesda, and Pete Hines, the VP of PR and marketing at Bethesda, discussing, of course, the most recent Microsoft acquisition of Bethesda. In this, they go over some surface level things, some personal stories, but also a bit of background on the deal overall. Todd Howard mentions a couple of things that are pretty interesting on this most recent acquisition, and a few insights that, although not super revealing, are definitely worth highlighting and definitely warrant some more discussion. This video was filmed earlier today, so it was after all of those major reactions to the purchase, and they kind of loosely seem to discuss some of them. One of the big things that was mentioned a couple of times throughout this was what exactly led to this acquisition. One of the things consistently reiterated is just the close working relationship between Bethesda and Xbox that's been going on for decades. The first Bethesda game studio's title to come to consoles was actually Oblivion, and it was a Xbox exclusive at the time. But apparently Xbox worked closely with them to get that working, even describing a certain tip where you could secretly restart the console to free up some memory while loading certain parts of the game. So if you had a long load screen, it was probably because of that. Pretty much all of the parties here somewhat reiterate this line around how Bethesda and Xbox are closely aligned with their values or visions. How the innovation of Bethesda is kind of matching up with the innovation from Xbox, or the innovation from Bethesda was appealing to Xbox. And it seems like one of the big motivating factors was trust. Xbox and Microsoft having this long-standing relationship, but also just working closely together and it going well, trusting each other.
And for us, it's not just what Microsoft and what the Xbox team can do, but it is the relationships that we have with those people and the amount of trust that we have.
And also how many of the employees at Bethesda only found out about this acquisition as it went public yesterday.
You know, for a lot of the company and our teams, they're finding out the same time the world is finding out.
This is indicative of a couple of things. There was some speculation that recent changes around Fallout 76 or even ESO were influenced by this decision. But clearly, if the vast majority of employees only just found out, it seems like no policy or internal changes have really gone into effect yet. Another line that was pretty interesting is around when this deal came to fruition. We saw this tweet yesterday where apparently Bethesda and Microsoft were in talks since about 2018, which led to many speculating that if this was such a long process, perhaps it was kind of known it was going to happen a while ago and certain teams were repurposed already. But in this interview, they mentioned how the opportunity actually came up over the summer.
But the opportunity that came up over the summer as we started talking about this, to me, just always felt right.
So now perhaps those aren't mutually exclusive, perhaps they have been in talks for the past 2 years, but some kind of catalyst happened internally over this summer, making it a lot more lucrative for one side or the other. But either way, that is an interesting takeaway. Perhaps this is a relatively new thing. Maybe negotiations only started over the past few months, which could even be supported more by the fact that that old tweet has been deleted now. Even further, they actually asked Todd Howard directly about Starfield, which I was kind of surprised to hear.
Which was a nice segue to my next question, because since I'm controlling everything here. Starfield, what's up?
I think it's getting really good hype for a game no one's seen.
Okay.
That response being pretty typical, but the more interesting one comes a bit later.
And once we got on the new systems, the things we found we could do, and so it's a major engine rewrite on that game.
So that's actually pretty big, and I think there's a lot to interpret around this. We've heard in the past how Starfield's engine is getting quite a bit of an overhaul. Even in Todd's initial statements around this acquisition, he described how the engine upgrade was going to be the biggest since Morrowind 2 Oblivion. I'm gonna have a bigger video tomorrow looking more in depth at some of the Starfield news, but the statements here are pretty big. It's more reinforcement that this is a considerable engine upgrade, not something minor like Skyrim to Fallout 4. And his comment about once we got the new systems, the things we found we could do is pretty interesting to me, because it certainly seems like Starfield will be a next-gen exclusive, or at the very least, there will be considerable drawbacks to playing it on current-gen systems. But also, if they are truly taking advantage of the new and upgraded hardware, that could mean they are doing something unique, something that has never been done in a Bethesda game before. Whether that be something like spaceflight, larger cities, or even something along the lines of updated procedural generation for planets, or even as simple as shorter load screens, because the games could really benefit from that. Outside of that, he's a few other minor comments just about how Starfield is something pretty special. He's excited to work with Xbox on that. And earlier in this, they even describe how some of their upcoming games are going to be better as a result of this acquisition. And I found that interesting also, because a big question I have around this is, what kind of role will Xbox actually play in Starfield or even other Bethesda title development? Starfield at this point is pretty well into its development cycle. It seems like significant pre-production began after Fallout 4's DLC, and then real full production started after Fallout 76, so it's been a couple of years. And we know that, for example, with Obsidian, after Microsoft purchased them, they were pretty hands-off with the Outer Worlds, considering it was well underway. A lot of development was completed. Seemingly Microsoft has a lot more influence on Avowed, Obsidian's next and upcoming game, but these statements make it seem like they are considerably more hands-on with Starfield, and reportedly have been aware of it for a while, based on those comments by Phil Spencer before and knowing about the roadmap. Obviously, Xbox wants Starfield to release as soon as possible, as it'll be an additional incentive and a fairly major incentive to buy an Xbox. Regardless of it being an exclusive, it of course will be in Game Pass, so for just $10 or even less with a free trial, you can get Starfield on your Xbox relatively cheaply, and as such, probably a bit more incentive to purchase an Xbox. So it does make you wonder what influence, if any, Microsoft will have on the development of Starfield. Perhaps some additional investment in Bethesda overall, just giving them more money to finish it quicker. There's been a lot of speculation that Starfield was originally planned as a November 2021 release, but then with COVID actually got pushed back to 2022. And Todd Howard definitely reiterates that point that Bethesda has had for a while now, where we'll hear more about Starfield when they're ready to fully show it.
People who know me, I like to wait as long as possible to show stuff. So we're closer to showing it than we were in the beginning of this conversation. Well, people at Microsoft, some of us see some stuff.
There's been a lot of speculation from fans that perhaps we're just going to get a one-off teaser trailer, kind of a reminder that, hey, by the way, we're still working on this. But I would say this comment really puts that to bed. The Game Awards were just announced. I think if we were to see something this year, that'd be when, but this comment definitely makes it seem very unlikely. Although even beyond that, speaking of Game Pass, we also hear quite a bit about that. We heard already how Xbox plans to bring many Bethesda titles to Game Pass on day one, actually naming Starfield. But there are a few questions about the back catalog, many of which are not on Game Pass right now. In this, they actually describe how having more of the back catalog or even all of the back catalog would be cool, but it's up to Phil.
Having more of our back catalog, having all of our back catalog, as you said, it's sort of whatever Phil decides to do and when. But
and just another small comment, they mention how if you have Game Pass, you get all of the Bethesda games.
Enjoyed what it's doing, and I think the reaction to this announcement was also, wait, I get all the Bethesda games?
So it certainly seems like that there are definitely some internal talks or somewhat plans for having nearly all of Bethesda's titles actually come to Game Pass at some point. Now, who knows when this will happen? Of course, the acquisition technically isn't even approved yet, but perhaps over the next couple of months or even with the launch of the next gen of consoles, we'll start to see some pretty major titles get added. Doom Eternal, Fallout 4, and Skyrim seem like the obvious choices, with Fallout 76 and ESO already being in there. One of the big back and forths I've been seeing in the community with the Bethesda acquisition is the question of console exclusivity, or really Xbox exclusivity. Will a title like Starfield only be available on Xbox and PC? But towards the end of this, it almost feels like Phil Spencer had a bit of a nod towards that. He describes how following this deal going live, he saw a lot of the consumer sentiment, a lot of which is that big question: will future Bethesda titles only be on Xbox? We heard in the past how it'd be on a case-by-case basis, but then here he does expand with this.
I'll just say at a fundamental level, our goal with every move that we make in Team Xbox is to enable you to play the games that you want to play with the people you want to play them with and where you want to play them.
And to me, that certainly felt like a nod towards big titles like Starfield being everywhere, not just restricting them to Xbox. Of course, it's not much. It's definitely far from a confirmation. I mean, internally, they may not even know yet. They still may be unsure as to whether or not where Starfield will go or if it'll only be on Xbox and PC. But it's another crumb you could point towards when arguing with people on Twitter about whether or not these Bethesda games will be exclusives. But then also, on the flip side, a different perspective. He clearly saw the discourse, the back and forth around console exclusivity, and he could have just cleared it up here like, hey, Starfield is or isn't going to be a console exclusive and doesn't. And if anything, his statements here could just be in reference to Game Pass and trying to bring these games to as many people as possible for just $10 a month. And I've seen some people taking this statement as more evidence that games are not coming to PS5 in the future. Those were a lot of the new details we found out from this interview. I think it was informative in an interesting way. It's not like we got a ton of new concrete details that you could be like, okay, Starfield confirmed 2021. But there are definitely some things said in this that make certain theories very likely, or significantly more likely than they were before. And also, I would say Bethesda, both Todd and Pete's description of this partnership is interesting, mentioning how they're partnering with Xbox because of trust and the relationship they've had, how it should make their games better. So it really does seem like this could have been a real financial thing. There have been some theories that Bethesda was hurting as of late, although seemingly Fallout 76 and even Doom Eternal did have their own degrees of success, and even ESO was top tier as far as revenue generation on Steam the past 2 years. Several of their other spin-off games have not been super successful, or perhaps didn't hit expectations. So though to some degree, of course, yes, at any point a acquisition occurs, there is a financial motive. Perhaps with this one, it is even a bit bigger, because terms like relationship and trust are so vague and with nothing to point towards, it does definitely make it seem like this could have been very much so a money thing. But of course, for Xbox, you now have a ton of additional offerings as far as first-party titles, or even just things to include in Game Pass. Outside of that, Todd Howard actually shared this pretty interesting story between him and Pete Hines with the Fallout 3 demo, this being around some interesting behind-the-scenes occurrences with that original demo at the Xbox showcase. They just talked about it during the interview, but I'm going to overplay the actual demo as it occurred, and it hopefully will give some context.
So what they do during a demo, it's live. You go to the controller, you're going to play through the demo, blah, blah, blah. And in case something goes wrong, like it crashes, there's someone else playing also, so they can call Broken Arrow in your headset and switch to the other live feed. And of course, Pete was doing it. So Pete's backstage. He would play live with me. But during the real press conference, you fill the stadium with however many it is, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, probably more, 3,000. There were wireless controllers, and I get up there, the press conference is starting, you can watch it back, and an MF for the controller, you get the little bloop, can't connect, the little 360.
Yeah.
And man, I just was like, oh, please no.
We're ecstatic to show publicly for the first time here today, Fallout 3 demoed live. Let's take a look.
And they yell Broken Arrow, and they switch to Pete playing, which we had not actually practiced. But that demo,
and by the way, in all of the rehearsals, I'm practicing, and what I have to do is basically keep up exactly with where Todd is. So if they switch over, it's not like he's a half a mile away, right? And the entire time I'm rehearsing, I'm thinking, this is the dumbest thing ever. They are never going to need this. Blake standing behind me yelling Broken Arrow, and I went, I'm now playing this. Boy, I better not hose this.
It was like two people went to a dance class, but they hadn't really danced together yet. They just and so I'll be like, and up here, it was the worst demo I've ever given, I think.
It's the Enclave. They've spotted me. So these guys are tough. So I'm going to switch to the Fat Man, which is a mini nuclear bomb catapult. Every kid wants one of these under the Christmas tree. It's going to line these guys up.
But most people couldn't tell back in the team. They were like, we couldn't tell.
That was a beautiful part about it.
He was trying to sort of guide me where I was, because if he wanted to look at something, I had to be listening and go, oh, he wants me to look at this, or So I was trying to anticipate what he was going to say.
Now I'm going to show you the Pip-Boy. There it is.
On my wrist is the Pip-Boy 3000. Here you can check your stats, various things, skills you can raise, and perks. That I can kill people in ridiculously violent ways, and I also have radios.
And I wonder how long it'll take to come up. Here I am pressing the button.
Although if you actually watch to the end of this one, that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Again, I should have a larger scale Starfield video tomorrow, looking more in depth at the claims made by Bethesda recently. But until next time, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all later.